Welcome back. Happy New Year. I've shown you a little of the fantastic landscapes that New Zealand has to offer, but today you are getting to see the inside of the Tapanui Vet South office. And that's where we're gonna stay today. It's that exciting. A lot of vetting is going out and seeing sick animals, going onto farms, talking to farmers about preventative stuff. There's a surprising amount of it at the desk. And I reckon for every hour on farm, there's at least another hour sat at a desk. Maybe charging things, chasing things up, talking to labs, all of that. Just now, I'm actually looking at some milk samples and I'm using a tool that I hadn't come across before coming to New Zealand, at least I hadn't used it. It's pretty cool and I think it's really important. A lot of the farms around here have these themselves, but those that don't can bring their milk samples in. And what we're talking about specifically is cows with mastitis, really quite common inflammation of the mammary gland, the udder. Now the bugs that cause mastitis are really varied and they can also be pretty varied in terms of the antibiotics they're sensitive to. How do we know what antibiotics they're sensitive to? Traditionally, farmer would have had to collect a milk sample, bring it to the practice, that would get packaged up, sent to the lab. The lab would then, once they got it, grow it on an agar plate or similar in some sort of medium. They'd get their result, they'd have to type that up in a report. That would then have to be emailed to the practice. That practice email would then be forwarded to the vet and the vet would then have to report that to the farmer. And you can imagine that each of those steps, there's potential for delay. And that's not good because the cow needs to be treated pronto. There's no point finding out which antibiotics those infections are sensitive to if we have to wait a week for the result. With this machine, and I'll show you it in a second, you only need a small sample, you get a turnaround time of, I think it's 21 hours, it's just less than a day. So the farmer can hold off on treating the animal for that short amount of time and choose the right antibiotic. And I think it's pretty cool. I must admit, compared to the farmers who have the machine and using it for their own cows a lot more regularly, I use it a lot more intermittently, as does everyone else in the practice. Thankfully, one of the vets who I've been covering for while she's away on maternity, Christine, has made this pretty foolproof instruction manual. Yes, master test in-house milk samples Tapanui how-to instructions, and they are really idiot proof, which is just as well because I would cock it up. I'll just show you what you do. It's pretty simple when you've got good instructions like this. I'll show you how I'll process the milk samples. I'll show you them loaded in the machine. And then once we have the results, I'll show you what sort of information this machine gives you and how that's useful. Anyway, I have to actually get these in the machine. I'm just gonna get some gloves. Now, I'm not wearing these just because I don't want to get some stinky mastitis milk on my hands. Also, just like a cow's skin, my skin is full of bugs, which actually, some of which can cause mastitis. Staph aureus would be one example. So I don't want to get bugs off my hands into that milk sample, which is then going to be tested and might return it incorrectly as a Staph aureus mastitis. We've got 3 samples from this farm. I've got the cow number on here. Ideally, we'd have the quarter of the udder that's affected. So left fore, right fore, left hind, right hind. This is real life. We can always get that information from the farmer at a later date. But I've got the cow number here, 898, and I need a cartridge, and they look like this. They stay in the fridge. I've just got these from the fridge. I'm gonna take this out carefully. It's one of those little funny silicone packs. And I'm just gonna adjust that so you can see what I'm working with. So, I've got this little cartridge. I'm gonna very carefully take off the lid. I'll put that out the way over there. Don't want to be touching those plungers because that, again, potentially could contaminate what we're doing. I've got my milk sample. The type of cartridge I'm using is dependent on the drugs that that farm uses for mastitis. So it varies slightly, but I've been into the account and checked that as according to the instructions. Thanks, Christine. And you take your milk. Yep, definitely smells off. No, you won't be able to see there, but you have to take my word for it. It's got clotted bits and what have you, just like you'd expect mastitis milk to have. You pour that into here, reasonably liberal amount, and you'll maybe touch, you might have to take my word for it, but that's got a number of different chambers in it. And then I've got to carefully pour that back in, the excess I should say, back in, which always seem to end up spilling plenty. It's okay actually, look at that. magic of Hollywood. But you can maybe see those chambers there now. So although I've tipped the excess back out, the milk is trapped in those chambers. And then once I put that plunger in, it's going to plunge that milk into those bottom chambers. And we'll talk about that in a second, but I'm going to very carefully again take my plungers. And you have to give it a bit of welly actually just to get it back in. So you hear a nice crunch and a click. And again, apologies if you can't see it, but if you can't, you have to take my word. That milk has now been plunged by that lid into all of those individual sort of sections. In the bottom of those, there's varying concentrations of 3 different types of antibiotics. You can see you've got 3 rows, and that will be, I presume, the concentration of antibiotics going one way or the other. So now I've got that in there. Put the lid back on that before I knock it over. So yes, now that's in there, I've got to label this with the cow number, and that was, already forgotten, 898. I don't have a quarter on this, so I'm just going to put Q question mark. I'll find that out at a later date. It could be multi-quarter, it doesn't look like it, but it could be. And I would put the farm name on here, but I'm not going to do that until I finish making this video. Client confidentiality, very important. So I've got this. Now you get to see the machine. It's not actually the most impressive looking thing, but what it does is really clever. So those are some old samples. I'll move them out the way. So this is the machine. It's called Plex. Yeah, you lift this up. You can see there's space for 4 of those little cartridges. I'm going to put my cartridge in the first section. And as you can see, there are arrows on the back of the cartridge, and they are meant to point to the back of the machine. Again, that's all in Christine's instructions. So hopefully pretty idiot proof. Now that's loaded, I can put the lid back on. And then I have to sort of get this machine to wake up. Right, actually I had to do a bit of jiggling there. It must have thought it still had Christmas off, but we're into the new year now, mate. So start master test. And you can see there's 2 options. So this correlates to that space. Let's see. So that correlates to that space, that correlates to that space, that correlates to that space, that correlates to that space. And you can choose either a clinical mastitis or an HISCC, which is a high somatic cell count. If you're a dairy farmer, you'll know all about that. Anyway, we're going for a clinical, so then I can either scroll up and down depending on if I want clinical or high somatic cell count. I'm going to stick with clinical, and I want web start, and I'll show you why in a second. And that's it, there you go, 21 hours, that's what's left, and then that will sort of count down as we go. So I'm gonna stick that back on, remember that 898. Then I'm gonna come back here, because I've only got so much time to do this, so put myself under pressure here a bit, but it'll be okay. Basically, I log on to this online database. In fact, I'm just gonna put it that way, because there'll be some more confidential information, no doubt, somewhere in there. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna log into this, if I can sit you right, nope. But this is the sort of thing you see. So that is our left-hand most space. That's, again, the 2 middle ones. That's the right-hand most. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go new test. This was a different type of cartridge. So like you see, there's NZP2, NZP4, and there's slightly different antibiotics they're testing for. And then there's your high somatic cell count. But we were an NZP4 here. That was 898. Quarter unknown, cow type. I'll have to write the sample reference in there, which is going to be my name and the client name. And that is going to email the results to the client as well as us. So they've got it as soon as they can. Again, although this is still only 21 hours, we want that cow to get the right treatment pronto. So if we're tied up doing other things, you know what life's like, you get other jobs thrown at you. The client already has those results. And in most cases, it's obvious enough at that point what the right treatment's going to be. But I'll show you when they come in. So yeah, and you see now that's changed to sort of test in progress. So 898, and once that 21 hours is up, we'll have a result returned for that. So you just got to do those other 2 and get them loaded in good time. Then after that, we'll switch forward to tomorrow, and I'll show you some of the results. That's a nice clotty sample of milk there for you, nice and cheesy. As I'm doing this, actually, I noticed that you can run these for sheep and goats as well. So presumably someone out there is using them for dairy sheep and dairy goats. So right, that is all of those samples there. Now cooking in there, I'm going to keep these in the fridge just in case we need them for anything. You can sort of see varying degrees of poison in there if you like. But it's just before 4 o'clock now, it's 21 hours. We should have those results around about lunchtime. That'll give that farmer enough time to treat those cows at the afternoon milking, assuming they're not once a day. That's the sort of turnaround you just wouldn't get with a full lab culture. Now, the lab culture might arguably give you more information, but it's always that trade-off between sort of turnaround time and doesn't give you enough information. So yeah, that's the Plex machine master test system. I'm gonna put these in the fridge and we will skip forward to tomorrow when I've actually got some results for you. Now, I told you the turnaround time was rapid. Watch this. That was quick. To tell you the truth, it's actually a couple of days after we set those going, so those results have been in for a day or two. They actually got emailed straight to the farmer. And by the time I got on the phone to him, he already had them in his inbox. He'd already treated those cows at the afternoon milking, which was tremendous. I just wanted to show you though what those reports look like. What I'll do, rather than show you my screen directly, I'll just screenshot this and we'll talk through it. So what you can see, like we said, this is one of the cows. We don't actually know which quarter was affected, so that's non-applicable. First thing you can see is that it identifies the infection, and that is specifically something called streptococcus or strep ubris, pretty common mastitis infection. But more interestingly, you can see below that are the 3 different antibiotics that this cartridge was testing for. So benzyl penicillin, tylosin and cloxacillin. And then next to each of those antibiotics, you can see that it has a figure called MIC for all of them. And MIC just means the minimum inhibitory concentration. That's the minimum concentration of that drug that inhibits the growth of that infection. So that's effectively our cutoff for resistance. So in this context, we're actually looking for a small number. We want a low concentration to be effective. You can see here how they've ranked them. So benzyl penicillin is the most effective drug in this case because it inhibits the strep ubris at the lowest concentration of all of these, so just 0.1 milligrams per litre. You can see then tylosin is also pretty effective, and then we go into cloxacillin, that's verging on fully resistant. So this is where the value comes into this. Cloxacillin is a very common intramammary treatment for mastitis. So if any of you guys have come across Orbanin, you can also get a very similar product containing the same active ingredient, cloxacillin, for pink eye. It goes into the eye. And it would have been so easy for this farmer if he'd had some of this lying around, if it had worked for him before in a previous mastitis case, just to grab a handful of these and use them on this cow. And by the looks of things, it wouldn't have been very effective. That's essentially wasted drug, that's a wasted cost, wasted time, and most importantly, it won't have worked for this cow. She would have been left with this painful, probably deteriorating mastitis. So seeing that, and crucially, with this quick turnaround of less than 24 hours, this farmer can choose a benzyl penicillin. So pretty much a straight penicillin. They've recommended intracillin milking cow intramammary. It's just a brand name. Or, because we don't actually know if this is multiple or single quarter, they've also said if it's multiple quarter, rather than putting an intramammary in each, you can use an injectable. So they've mentioned Penethoject. There are other brands, Mamazin, and so on. And crucially, because this is a painful condition, I'm told that by many women who've had mastitis, they've rightly said that we should consider the use of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like Metacam if we think it's warranted. I'll not show you the other two, but safe to say they were different. So it really does highlight the value of doing this sort of testing. Now, what these guys seem to have cracked here is that turnaround time. Like I say, we could send this off to the lab, they could grow it, they could then do the sensitivity tests. That is still a really useful thing to do in some cases, some outbreaks of mastitis. But there just is that lag, and for everyday cases of mastitis, we need a quicker turnaround time, and I think this is what these guys have cracked. We use more and more technology when we're farming livestock, especially for dairy, not only to monitor health, but reproduction and so on. And I will admit, I'm sometimes a bit skeptical about some of it, but something like this, the principle of it, I think, is spot on. And they seem to, like I say, have mastered the turnaround time, which is the crucial thing. I hope that was interesting. Again, apologies it was at the desk, but like I said, I'm sure at least half my time is spent at the desk rather than on farm at the coalface. It's just a reality of the job. If you did find that interesting and you're not already subscribed, don't be afraid to click subscribe, ring the little bell next to it, give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment with some feedback. Did you find that interesting? Have you guys used any of these types of machines before? Turns out you can get this in the UK, but only very recently. In fact, it's been since I've been in New Zealand that they brought it out. I think it was September 2022. Any dairy vets out there using it? Any dairy farmers have their own machine? A lot of the farmers here have their own machine. I'd be really interested to know. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'll see you for the next video. Until then, stay out of trouble and I'll see you next week.